Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue 138, and we're covering Wiccan as suggested by our present-level patron, Ruby. And we have brought in a special guest, friend of the show from another fantastic podcast, from the Homo Superior podcast. Welcome, Khelan. Khelan, thank you so much for taking the time to record with us tonight.
Thanks so much. Love that we're going to be talking about Wiccan, one of my favorite characters over the last 15 years.
He's definitely a very cool character. I've read a little bit here and there about him, but in prepping for the show, I got to read a lot more and definitely want to read more than what I was able to piece together. And we'll definitely be checking out additional books with him. So we'll get into your show in just a sec. But something that we don't do this often enough, but I just want to give a special name check and thank you to all of our fantastic patrons. We thank you in general every week, but it's not often that we once again name check everybody. So thank you to all of our patrons. We've got humble citizens Dan and Kate, local officials Frank, Ray, Jonathan, the mayors Angela, Chad, Devon, Maggie, Matt, Nyan, Ryan, and Tasha. And Presidents Ariel, Jeanine, Matt, and Ruby. Without you, we wouldn't be doing this. But you all keep the lights on, and you let us keep going week in and week out. So we are incredibly grateful to each and every one of y'all. And you can join the ranks of those awesome people by going to patreon.com/capesonthecouch and subscribing. Anywhere from $1 to $5 a month gets you additional content, early access, and all kinds of good stuff. So, Khelan, before we get into talking about Wiccan, why don't you just explain a little bit about Homo Superior and what your podcast is about?
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. So Homo Superior, it's 5 gay men based in DC, Washington, DC, not DC Comics. I like to clarify that for folks. We're mostly focused on covering X-Men comics, all the, various spin-offs. But we also talk a lot about other comics, comic book related and sci-fi movies and TV shows. Like we do a lot of stuff with the MCU. We've been on since 2017. We will be hitting our 5-year anniversary early next year, which I am still baffled by the fact that we've lasted as long as we have. But we have a good time. I like to say that we're the dumbest and smartest podcast out there, but emphasis on the dumb. Like we definitely bring the stupid when we need to.
Well, we know a thing or two about that. And as I said to you before the show, I love the name. I'm a big Doc, especially, but both of us are big fans of puns and wordplay. And so I read Homo Superior, and I was like, it's a gay podcast talking about X-Men.
That's amazing.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I'm just amazed nobody else took it. And I was like, I did a little search. I was like, done. We're taking it.
There you go. It was fate. It was meant to be. So we'll get into the background real quick. Wiccan, created by Alan Heinberg and Jim Cheung in Young Avengers #1 in April of 2005. If you've heard our episode on the Wanda and Vision relationship, some of this stuff is going to be a little bit familiar to you, but needless to say, Wiccan is one of those characters that has one of the more convoluted backstories coming up. Although we're doing Donna Troy in a couple of weeks, and I think she ultimately takes the cake on messed up backstories, but Billy's close. So Billy Kaplan is a magic user who is recruited by Iron Lad, who is actually a heroic time-traveling variant of Kang the Conqueror, to join a team of heroes to replace the disbanded Avengers, because this is in the wake of the Avengers Disassembled storyline. So he initially begins calling himself Asgardian. He changes his name to Wiccan because, as suggested by Kate Bishop, one of his teammates, the name Asgardian would be fodder for jokes and such, because he begins dating his teammate Teddy Altman, the shapeshifter called Hulkling. So the team encounters Tommy Shepherd, who, when rereading the Young Avengers story, lives in Springfield, New Jersey, which, not to get too inside baseball, but that's where I live. So I'm not giving you my address, but I can tell you where I live. It's Springfield, New Jersey. And I was like, wow, okay, that's kind of cool. So Tommy Shepherd looks identically to him, but has different hair and super speed powers. So Billy and the Young Avengers join Captain America's anti-registration team in Civil War, and an attack on Billy is what kicks off a massive fight that leaves several heroes dead or incapacitated. So Billy and Tommy come to learn of a possible connection to the Scarlet Witch, who, sit tight, folks. So if you, again, recall the Scarlet Witch and Vision episode, Wanda previously had twin boys named Billy and Tommy that vanished when it was revealed that she created them out of chaos magic, but they later vanished after Mephisto wiped them from existence, and their souls were repurposed into Billy Kaplan and Tommy Shepherd.
Hashtag because comics.
And one of the biggest storylines involving Billy, Tommy, and Teddy is the Children's Crusade. So Billy and the Young Avengers seek out Wanda, who had been missing since the House of M, no more mutants and all that, to determine their true parentage. So after finding an amnesiac Wanda in Latveria, who is engaged to Dr. Doom, she has her memories and powers restored and reveals that she is, in fact, their mom. So a battle with Dr. Doom leaves Cassie Lang dead. She's the daughter of the second or third Ant-Man, I forget, Scott Lang. She's Scott Lang's daughter, but Teddy ends up proposing to Billy. Fast forward a little bit to Empire. Thanks to his Skrull-Kree heritage, Teddy becomes emperor of a new Skrull-Kree alliance, and they declare war on the Kotati, a plant-like race bent on revenge against their former Skrull enslavers and the rest of the universe. So before he leaves to go do his emperor thing, Teddy and Billy get married in Vegas, and then once the war is over, they have another formal wedding combining Skrull-Kree and Jewish customs, because Billy is Jewish through his adoptive / semi-birth parent, not really his birth parents, but they're kind of his birth parents. That's still kind of up in the air. The Kaplans. Basically, the Kaplans are Jewish, and so Billy identifies as Jewish through them, and he is currently serving as the prince consort to Teddy, who, as I said, is the emperor of this Kree-Skrull alliance. So we glossed over a bunch of stuff. Even though he's only been around for 15 years, there's still quite a few stories that do involve Teddy and Billy and Tommy. All three of them seem to have a lot of stories together by virtue of the Young Avengers, and also the Billy and Tommy are brothers, and then Billy and Teddy are now married. So there's a lot of interplay with them and their group. So getting into the issues, I've got three, I don't want to say quote unquote negatives, but three issues. And then we don't do this too often, but I have what is not an issue, and I consider it a positive. And it's something that was kind of refreshing to read as I was going through these stories. But we'll start off with the issues as we do. Uncertainty over parentage causes stress. And this is one of the cruxes of a lot of the early stories involving Billy, because he doesn't really know. Is he Wanda's son? Is he not Wanda's son? He has a feeling about it. Tommy's less certain. There's a lot going on here. And so before we get into Doc and the formal analysis, so to speak, Khelan, why don't you give us some of your thoughts, especially since as an expert, an expert, if you will. Obviously, I think you're well acquainted with these kinds of stories. So what were some of your thoughts about reading Billy and his trials over his finding his parents?
Well, the first thing is, I'll just say, I thought I was good at puns, but my God, nothing compared to you. So well done there. But look, with Wiccan, like characters like him, Hulkling, everybody who was introduced in Young Avengers, and even other younger Marvel characters introduced, I would say, in the last 15 years, including Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, Miles Morales, who is Spider-Man introduced in the Ultimate Universe, brought to the 616. Like, Marvel has done a really nice job of introducing a lot of newer characters, a lot of legacy characters with a lot of diversity. Obviously, both Billy and Teddy are queer. Miles and Kamala are, people of color. So I think all that's wonderful. And, I think a lot about like when Billy was introduced. So April 2005, right? As you said. So my day job, I work in politics. I'll just say that. You think about what was happening right around then in the country. George Bush had won re-election in 2004. One of the big reasons why you got a lot of evangelicals out by putting, anti-gay marriage ballot initiatives in the country. And so the country was, I would say, more homophobic than it is now. Even back then, I was an out gay man. It was really uncomfortable, and dealing with that, dealing with it at work, dealing with that with family members and friends. And the fact that you had Alan Heinberg, who himself is a gay man, writing both Billy and Teddy, and clearly you saw the attraction immediately. And when Teddy goes with Billy back to his house, and his parents, he's like, "Are you going to tell your parents?" Meaning, are you going to tell them you're a superhero, you're an young Avenger? And they're like, "No, we already know." And Teddy, welcome to the family. And I was like, this was such a sweet moment. So like that just made, like, immediately fell in love with the characters, fell in love with the the Kaplans themselves for just being such a awesome, like, supportive family. And I also love the fact that, like, all the stories that you've mentioned, Alan Heinberg, wrote the original Young Avengers and Children's Crusade. When we got to Empire, Al Ewing was one of the co-writers. And we didn't really talk about, like, Kieran Gillen's Young Avengers run, which is my personal favorite, just because I think it was really fun and had dealt with a lot of stuff I really dug. Most of the writers that have written Billy have been queer themselves. So that's, I think, super, super important, that it's not like a cis-het individual who's writing a queer character, although there's nothing to say that they can't do that. It's just like the representation really matters from both a character and a creative standpoint. So just a huge fan the way Marvel's treated him. And I geeked the F out when I saw a young Billy in WandaVision earlier this year. Obviously, they're going to come, him and Tommy are going to come back at some point, whether it's Multiverse of Madness or another future MCU project.
Yeah, that was definitely very interesting. As soon as they announced, they were like, "Oh, we've got twins and Billy and Tommy." I was like, "Okay, now I see where they're going with this." All right.
Yeah.
So Doc, and thank you, Khelan, for that insight. And we're going to get a little bit more into the supportive nature and the reaction to the coming out and everything in a little bit. But Doc, the uncertainty over the parentage, like I said, some of the crux of those early stories. About, is he Wanda's kid? Is he not? And the stress that it puts him under, and by extension, the rest of the Young Avengers and the senior Avengers, so to speak.
Right. The idea that basically you're starting from scratch and yet you're not. So you know fully well that there have been people that have supported you from the start. And you find out at some point, to bring it back to our world, you find out that maybe the things that you once thought were so straightforward are not. There are other people that are responsible for your existence, and yet, and this is true for many people, you may or may not ever get to meet them. Some people are given up for adoption at very young ages. Some people are the product of donation in terms of sperm, let's just say it. There's all sorts of reasons why these things happen. And I want to make it clear that there's no right or wrong way as to how a person emotionally reacts to that, because people find out at different ages. It could be something that is known from the time the child can develop their own thoughts, and it was never a secret. It can be that it's something that the family has tried to hide. And from that standpoint, the idea of having secrets upon secrets can make things 10 times worse, because it's very rare that people are able to hold on to things forever. And humans are curious by nature, so they're going to find out different details. And unfortunately, if the people that had the secrets in the first place didn't have all the information to start with, there's no clear resolution. If that's the case, then you're going to potentially have a lifelong trek of discovery that could be beneficial if you know that it's something that you feel like you need closure on. Great. Or if it's something that causes constant angst, then you're going to have this in the background influencing everything you do for the rest of your life. I'm being a little dramatic when I say those things, but it's only because that's the way patients have presented it to me. I've seen a wide spectrum of how people react to knowing that there are people biologically that are a part of them, because some of those traits, especially when it comes to appearance, are their responsibility. So it's nice to know that you exist. I keep putting this question mark on all of it, because there's an opportunity for these things to be positive unless the person takes it a completely different way. Maybe I was rejected. Maybe I wasn't wanted. Once again, all possibilities, not meant to say that that's the way everybody deals with it. But what if you actually meet those people? Is there resentment? Is there joy? Like, I'm finally glad that I get to do this. What about the other person? They may be more like, I moved on with my life. I'm just not there. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they always wanted to know and they were scared to find out. So these are all possibilities. And I leave it so open because it's just something where there's no way to predict. Just no way. And for the most part, when you have uncertainty, you have anxiety. And that is overwhelmingly what we see when people are dealing with this.
Well, it's interesting you bring all that up because it was something that had been occurring in my brain while I was reading this sort of thing, that what we're seeing now, especially with the rise of at-home genetic testing and genealogical research and things like Ancestry and 23andMe and so on and so forth, is a lot of folks are finding relatives genetically that they didn't know that they had. My family and I have been doing genealogical research on my family tree for over 20 years at this point, and my parents have really taken this and just done so much yeoman's work on tracing my family tree back, to Europe and such. But we're very heavily involved with Ancestry. And so one of the things that my parents do is help other folks that are looking for people that they're related to that end up being in our family tree, because our online research is so extensive that folks write my parents all the time and say, oh, related to this person, I'm related to that person. And you would be shocked at how many people write them and say, I was adopted and I found a DNA test that says, okay, like I'm second or third cousins with this person, and I have this whole additional family that I never knew that I had, and helping people answer questions that they've been searching for. In some cases, in one particular case, I know my parents have been telling me this woman is 80 years old and never knew her true parentage until very recently. And so my parents have been working very diligently to get her some answers, because they said this woman is in her 80s. Like, realistically speaking, we don't know how much time she has left, and we would like to provide some sort of closure for her in that. So we're seeing this in a real scale, real global scale now, especially, like I said, because of the internet and because of genetic testing and things and so on and so forth. So some of these issues that you're talking about are very real, and it has nothing to do with chaos magic and demons selling souls. It's I'm getting answers to questions that I've been searching for my entire life. And do I really want to know what those answers are? Because sometimes it's the devil you know versus the devil you don't. And that's not a pun on Mephisto or anything, but the point is that these are very real things that have to be taken into consideration. So excellent points to all of them. So issue number 2 then is questions over the extent of powers. And again, this is something that really comes up heavily in the Children's Crusade, is that Billy's power set is believed to be of a certain level. And then all of a sudden he's tapped into this, a whole other level that he's capable of. And now he begins to be viewed with some level of suspicion, because a combination of you're more powerful than you realize, you're not trained in these powers, and you may be Wanda's kid. So we're really not going to trust you. And that creates a whole level of distrust among him and, again, some of the senior Avengers. And so that's a whole bit of problem. So Doc, we'll start with you this time, and then we'll switch over to Khelan.
Okay, so I think we've dealt with this in different episodes in maybe a slightly different way, but the idea that someone is talented and they don't recognize what other people see in them, and from that standpoint, other people either being intimidated or just trying to downplay or even sabotage what the person is going through, especially. I think that tends to skew towards adolescence more than any other time period, because that's a time of discovery for everyone. What is it that you do well? What is it that you enjoy? And not to get super practical about it, but what also can you make a living out of? Those are all things that we start to search for. And so let's go ahead and take Billy, for example. He's able to find a place because clearly it's a super powered group. So you got to have something. That's wonderful. In terms of their own ages and experiences, fits in pretty well. Even finds the love of his life. That's amazing. There's nothing negative to say about that. Starts demonstrating things that even other super powered beings are saying, that is a bit much. So you gotta imagine that when one part of, I guess you could call that triad, goes a little off kilter, then you start questioning the other parts. Like, oh well, do I really belong here in the first place then? Should I be doing my own thing? Or then, well, wait, maybe they're just totally mistaken. And I'm not as powerful as they say I am, and it's all wrong. Or I'm more powerful than they think, and I'll show them. Or wow, I just don't want to go this route at all. And yet now, because of what I'm able to do, I guess this is my only lot in life. Just to extrapolate it out once again back to the real world. If you have external forces that are saying like, hey, you're really good at this one thing. And meanwhile, you're saying, yeah, that's true, but I like this other thing. And, other people are pointing out that's not nearly as good as this other stuff. You really need to focus on this thing that you're really talented at. Like, oh, okay, but I don't get as much enjoyment. And you have this pull back and forth. And then meanwhile, the people that are around you, they're like, hey, man, do whatever the hell you want. Well, now it just gets a little, no pun intended, it gets a little chaotic. And when that happens, you're going to have to find a resolution. And while life definitely provides many opportunities to shift over time, it doesn't have to stay static with one thing versus another. It does mean that you're more than likely going to invest your time in one area to get good at it. And if it happens to be that talent, then people can understand it. But if it's something like, quote unquote, a passion project like podcasting, then, sometimes you might get people saying like, why are you even doing that? In which case you have to make sure you have a strong support system and great co-host that make sure that you keep with it for 100-something episodes. I'm sorry, am I getting too personal now?
Not at all. Khelan, so piggybacking off of what it is that Doc said, what is it that you can provide in terms of a different perspective on this question of who am I really and what you're presenting to the outside world versus what it is that you're dealing with internally, and how to harmonize the two so that there's less of a dissonance there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And I think Marvel comics specifically, but comics in general and sci-fi and genre fiction, when it's good, it deals with, a lot of these issues of the X-Men, for example, have been a stand-in for whatever, multicultural community you're talking about, whether it's a racial or ethnic community, or if you're, part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I think that's why I can say this personally, the X-Men specifically have so many queer fans. Comics in general have so many queer fans. And when you have someone like Billy Kaplan, everything that Doc mentioned and the question that you asked, it's clearly a stand-in for him being a teenage queer kid, having to deal with it, even though his parents have been super supportive. Like, he's having identity issues. I mean, I didn't come out till college, but like in high school, which is where, Billy is at this point, he's probably like 15 or 16 years old. Even if you're in a super supportive environment, you're in a quote unquote liberal area, it's still like, okay, I thought my identity was this because everything that was shown to me through pop culture, through, my surroundings in high school is this very heteronormative attitude of like the boy and the girl getting together. All romantic comedies show the guy and the girl getting together. They, love songs are about, heteronormative couples. It's like at this point again, so I mean, 2005 is when he's introduced. We're talking about the Children's Crusade to a certain degree, about like him trying to find his true parentage, figuring out that Wanda might be his real mom. It's 2010. It was only 11 years ago, but he still didn't see that much representation. And now it's gotten a lot better. I'm not saying it's perfect. I actually have a lot of issues about the MCU and how that's done. And if you give me the chance, I'll go on a diatribe, because in the MCU, canonically, there are two queer people. One is the guy that Anthony Russo played in Endgame. And he's in one scene with Steve Rogers in like a little therapy session. He's queer. Second, you blink and you miss it, is Loki in the Loki miniseries, or the first season of Loki on the MCU, where he basically tells Sylvie, yes, I'm bisexual, but he doesn't really say it, and it's never brought up again. And I'm pretty sure that Marvel will never bring it up again. And they wanted a little pat on their back. And I say this as somebody who loves Marvel, loves the MCU, loves these comics and TV shows and movies. but pardon the phrase, or Marvel can be kind of chicken shit sometimes about this stuff because they've got to sell product to countries where homosexuality is either illegal or like definitely like looked down upon, or queerness is looked down upon. And so I mentioned Billy got introduced in WandaVision, as did Tommy. They're going to bring in the Young Avengers into the MCU somehow. Like clearly they're setting that up with all the various shows and movies. And Billy's gayness, his relationship with Teddy, is central to it. Like part of Young Avengers is part of Empire. It's their relationship is an integral part of one of the biggest miniseries that Marvel did last year, which was amazing. But when it comes time to adapt it in any which way or form, I'm just worried that like it's going to be like a quick little whatever, and then it's just easy to edit out in places where you can't really show this stuff. I'm hoping I'm wrong. Eternals is coming out in a few weeks, and there's supposed to be a gay character, and hopefully it's more integral to the plot than what we've seen thus far. And I've definitely gone off on some tangents here, so I appreciate you guys staying with me. But with Billy specifically, I mean, his identity of like whether he's a Kaplan or a Maximoff, whether he is just this like quote unquote normal like gay teen who wants to live a normal life with his boyfriend, that now husband, and then or is he like, you know, one of the most powerful wizards in the 616? You know, he's the heir not only to Wanda Maximoff, who is so powerful she decimated the mutants to 198, but I know they retcon this, but they're going to unretcon it. He's the grandson of Magneto, you know, and that like who is like one of the biggest anti-heroes in Marvel, and like, you know, his lineage is absolutely integral to who he is. And so the identity issues, you know, I think Marvel was really smart about this, dealing with like, you know, the micro and then dealing with the macro. And it's like the best of Marvel comics, in my opinion.
Well, I also just want to add a couple of points. One, that if you consider Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to be MCU canon, Joey Diaz.
I don't.
Okay. Well, all right. I do. Joey Diaz.
I'm just kidding. Yeah.
That's okay. It's all right. Yeah. Joey Diaz from the team who's gay. And then with respect to the story, you know, talking about all the confusion, one thing that we didn't really mention in the background. So when the characters were first created, Alan Heinberg basically was going to initially have Teddy really be this female shapeshifter called Chimera, who was going to present as Teddy as male and then come out as, you know, really be female. And then it was going to be a question of, is Billy in love with Teddy as male or Chimera as female and whatever. And I believe the editor just said, just make them gay. It'll be just easier. But Alan really wasn't sure when he was writing it how that was going to be received. So I think it's credit to Marvel to have that kind of forward thinking to say, just make them gay and we'll deal with whatever, as it comes.
Well, what you're talking about, be it LGBTQ plus or racially related, which is something that I know we've talked about on the show as well. When it comes to media as a whole, over the past century, it was originally you don't talk about it. Then it became, okay, you acknowledge that there may be something in the world about it, but you don't ever put it in a script. Then it became, well, you can wink and nod to it, but you can't actually have a conversation about it. And with comics, we're at the point where, yes, you can have a conversation about it. And they're taking some steps where, yes, you can actually put it at the forefront of a story. And unfortunately, films have not gotten to that point, at least when it comes to the, MCU. So there's a huge lag there. But just when it comes to all of these topics, following that pattern, I'm at least glad to see the progress. I'm not satisfied, but at the same time, acknowledging that, okay, at least there's something there. It's just very jarring, as you've pointed out, that on the comics level, they're doing this. In the MCU, it's barely a thing. So there's a whole lot of catching up.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with size of the audience and money making, because they can afford to, for better or worse, and I hate to put it this way, they can afford to take the bigger risks with the comics because they know that only a couple thousand people are going to read the comics versus the millions and billions of dollars that they make off of the movies and all of the associated merchandise and everything. So that's why they're like, well, we can put whatever in the comics. They'll be gay, trans, whatever. They can push the boundaries in the comics because they know it's not going to make the ripples. Even though, as we've seen now over the past couple of years, every time there's a major status quo change in the comics, it makes the front page headlines and everything. Oh, there's a black Spider-Man now. They're getting rid of Peter Parker. No, they're not. Time out. No. Because it stokes the fires of outrage. And we all know that, unfortunately, we live in a clickbait-driven media environment. So this is what sells. But I digress. That's a topic for a whole other different podcast, much, much different than this one. So the last issue that Billy has been struggling with as of late is that his husband's responsibilities pull him off world because, as we said in the background, Teddy is the emperor of the Kree-Skrull alliance. And this is very much a situation where you would say kind of like Billy is the first gentleman, so to speak. He's married to the king. He's married to the important person. He's married to the president, what have you. And so it takes that time away. And this is something we've seen a lot lately. I know it was a major issue in Empire, and some of the fallout titles from that is that he wants to spend time with his husband, which is totally natural, and yet he can't. And so there's kind of that chafing there that he's going to go along with it because he wants, he'd rather be around Teddy than not, but he's still kind of like, but do you have to do this stuff? So Khelan, we'll jump back to you first on this one.
The thing that I really kind of popped out to me on the scenario you just mentioned was, at first I was like, oh, Billy gets to have the space adventure, with his husband. It's like he's around the Kree and the Skrull. He's around the new intergalactic, council, whatever. I call it the space model UN. I don't know if you guys have been reading, it just ended, but Guardians of the Galaxy by Al Ewing. And then they were doing the Last Annihilation storyline, which was like Dormammu ended up being the big bad, basically hatched out of Ego, the Living Planet, who says comics aren't complicated. But when he said, he had a feeling of something amiss back on Earth. And it was right after the Hellfire Gala in the X-Men books. And that's where the gala ended with Wanda being killed. And now they're doing a storyline called The Trial of Magneto, where, Magneto is the culprit of killing his once daughter, or not daughter, or maybe daughter again. And he was like, I didn't really hear much more about the Hellfire Gala when he's talking to Agent Brand, who is the head of SWORD, which is, kind of bridging the cosmic books and the X books in the 616. Agent Brand, being as Machiavellian and as pragmatic to a fault that she is, she's just like, oh yeah, it's all good. It's all fine. But what I want to see, the follow-up, is him finding out about Wanda and having that struggle between being Teddy's consort, the first gentleman, as you said, and, the responsibilities, and then having to say, oh my God, my mom was just killed. I don't know if she's coming back. Of course she's coming back. She's going to be, in the movies, but, that's how comics work. But he doesn't know that yet. So it's unfortunate that Guardians of the Galaxy just ended. I was pretty sad about that because I think Al Ewing did a really nice job with that book. And Donny Cates did too in the previous volume. But I'm hoping that it gets followed up on somewhere. I love Billy, obviously. That's why I'm on this podcast right now. And I love the relationship he has with Teddy. And I love how all that's going to play out, specifically with the Krakoans, specifically Magneto, all the other various characters that are involved with the Trial of Magneto and with Wanda.
Yeah, there's definitely room there, and hopefully, have they announced if Guardians is coming back with a new writer? I admit it's not something I knew it was ending, but I haven't been following up as much as I should.
No, the only cosmic book that I know of that's going to happen is actually Al Ewing is the co-writer with Ram V, who's a South Asian writer, has been mostly doing stuff for DC. He's coming over to Marvel. They're co-writing Venom and the Eddie Brock stuff because now he's the new King in Black. When they took out Null, it's all the cosmic stuff. And so Ewing is still doing cosmic stuff, but he's doing it through Venom. I haven't heard anything about a Guardians book. Sword is still continuing, but a lot of the X books are going to be revamped pretty soon or start over early next year after the 10 Lives and Deaths of Wolverine. So who knows if Sword's going to stick around or if it's going to be a permutation or evolution of the book, maybe about, Storm, Regent of Saul, which I would not be mad about. I'm hoping Billy's story specifically gets followed up on somewhere.
Okay. We'll have to keep an eye out for that. But Doc, getting into some, I guess, the applications of the whole, his husband dealing with all of that responsibility and taking time away from what is otherwise a very solid, loving marriage. And it's not to take anything off of, obviously, Billy and Teddy loving each other, but Teddy's got all these additional responsibilities that he has to deal with, and that kind of annoys Billy.
Yeah, and that's understandable. So what do you do with people you love? You support them. What do you do with people you love who are successful at something? You support them even more. What do you do with people who are so successful that their obligations now are eating into personal time with you? Awkward. There's something about the idea that whatever you consider to be your ideal life is not going to 100% match with, and this is a scary thing to say, it's not going to 100% match with every person on the planet. You're not going to find that. You're going to find people that are close. So in this circumstance, it's not even a matter of whether or not he wanted it to be this way. You don't automatically just get the chance every day to say, oh, you get to control a whole society and make sure that it does well. If you get that thrust upon you, even if it wasn't part of your original plans, a lot of people aren't going to balk at that. Some people don't want it, but if you do, then okay, more power to you. But then on Billy's side, and anybody that's been in this type of relationship, you know that there are two competing goals. You want that person to do well, but you also want the person that you married or the person that you're involved with, if you're not married, whatever. And yet now you're starting to wonder, okay, but am I being selfish now? Because all of a sudden, what happens when a person is doing things for quote unquote the world, whatever that is, and you want to be their world, not just part of that world. You really want that intimacy, and it's just not quite the way it used to be. We know things are always going to change, and that's just how life works. But that doesn't mean you wanted it to change so drastically. And when those things happen, as always, the number one thing is communication. How do you talk about it, and what are the expectations? As I had said in the previous episode, we know that the balance doesn't quote unquote exist the way we want it to, but then just how much do you fight for it? Not just fight about it, because when we think of that, we think of two people just going at each other and saying, I want it this way. No, I want it this way. No, how do you fight together for it? How do you put your heads together and say, this is what life could be if we're able to have the moments that we both cherish? It doesn't all have to be exactly one way. It can shift back and forth. And the more people realize that, the more they'll get out of every experience, even if it wasn't what they originally expected.
Very well said. So the last thing that I want to talk about, and like I said, we typically talk about three issues that they're dealing with. What I want to talk about is something that kind of occurred to me over the course of reading all these books. And I'm going to call this not an issue. And I would say it's very refreshing. And I know this is something that Khelan had referenced a little bit earlier in the discussion. His family and his support system from jump, it seems that, again, we alluded to it earlier, that when he was trying to explain to his parents that he was actually a superhero, they believed that he was coming out of the closet, and they immediately were like, oh, we've known for a while Teddy is going to make a great son-in-law and this, that, and the other. They have wonderful friends and support system. And reading this and whether it's the allegory or whether it's the actual coming out, it's refreshing to read a story about a coming out that does not involve the person also dealing with so much pushback and so much bigotry and anger and vitriol. And I'm not naive enough to say that those things don't happen anymore in 2021. I'm certainly understanding that there are still folks whose coming out story involves a lot of anger and frustration and stuff. But it's just wonderful to read a story that's like, oh, okay, everything else is maybe going to hell around him, with the powers and, constantly having to save the world and stuff. But he knows that he's got that support system. And I just think that it's refreshing to see these stories about queer and LGBTQ plus characters that are not going through the trope of, oh yeah, they're going to come out of the closet and they're disowned by the parents, or they've been kicked out of the home, or this and that. Just like, I just was so joyed to read these stories and go, is a positive side. And again, not saying it's all sunshine and rainbows, but it's just refreshing to read that as, I guess, a change of pace, so to speak. And so, Khelan, I was wondering if you could just provide a little bit of insight. Obviously, I'm not asking for your whole entire backstory, but just reading, as I'm sure you have, countless coming out stories over the years. What are some of the positive and wonderful things about this story that kind of set it apart from some of the others?
I think the way you were talking about, some of the other coming out stories or stories involving, queer characters, I call it tragedy porn. When you started seeing, queer characters, from 80s, 90s, aughts, whether it was in TV, movies, comics, you name it, like it was always something about coming out, and the coming out experience is really tough. It's about HIV, or it's about hate crimes. And, I was so conditioned for all that. So when I read Billy having that moment, I was like incredibly just like elated. I was like, yes, it was a little like Pollyanna-ish. It was a little like too good to be true, but sometimes you need that. You need that. Not every story involving a queer character, needs to be tragedy. Like we can have other stories, and this is true of also, people of color and, other multicultural communities, and doesn't need to be this sort of tragedy porn, what I call Oscar bait. Not that, Young Avengers could win an Oscar, but, it was great. And like, it's so funny. I contrast it with right when we started Homo Superior a few years ago. We started with all the X books that were coming out then, one of which was Iceman, and Bobby Drake had just come out of the closet. His younger version, was outed by Jean Grey, which is pretty shitty, and it was pretty shitty that Bendis wrote it that way. Brian Michael Bendis, who's a cis-het writer. I'm sure he meant well, but it was just left a bad taste in my mouth. And then I did like the fact that, like, this time displaced younger Bobby Drake was gay. That meant, that the older one, had to come out himself. I really did like that. But the book, which was written by Sina Grace, who's a fine writer and who's gay himself, dealt with some cool stuff, but then had to deal with like his parents, being like completely bigoted people, and like not being able to understand the fact that he was both a mutant as well as, as being gay. And I was like, I get it. I feel like I've read the story a million times, and it's just like, it was exhausting. And that came out in 2017. And so the fact that we got the stuff with Billy in like 05, 06 is super refreshing. It just is. One thing I just wanted to say, kind of related to, just going back to the earlier point, was, the responsibility of Billy being a consort, and, Doc, you talking about the push and pull of relationships. You've got an emperor and his consort, and they're super powered individuals, and they're still teenagers. I mean, think about the pressure of like relationships in general as an adult, and then the relationship of your partner having to either get a new job, you have to move somewhere, you go with them, and then it becomes a super important job, most important job in the galaxy. And my God, you're like 17 or 18 years old. Like how do you deal with that how do you deal with that pressure? I think I would like just absolutely lose my marbles.
Yeah. Yeah. You think of like just the overall, I know we've talked about adolescence just in general, the idea of growth, identity, motivations for the future, all of it together, in addition to trying to merge that with someone else's exact same circumstances of what they may want, which may, it lines up kind of sort of together enough that you're going to stick with each other. But above and beyond that, okay, fine, then every other thing is a possibility, and you have the energy to do it. You're young, you aren't so jaded that you're just gonna look at the downside to everything. Yeah, it's one of those circumstances where, to go back to exactly what Anthony was talking about, you really are going to have to at least hope that in those situations you have enough people around you that no matter what choices you make or how things end up happening with results, you feel supported. You feel like people are not just going to let you just wander off and just waste away or make horrible choices that have negative consequences for everyone. You know that at least with that type of support, even if it's not the greatest situation, it's going to be better than it would be otherwise. So the fact that they're willing to put that on the table from the start and say, yes, there are going to be problems. Yes, there are going to be concerns, but no matter what, we got your back. That is incredibly powerful. That's the type of thing where in my line of work, I'm dealing with people who are depressed to the point of suicide. And the one thing that they're looking for sometimes is hope. And if they can find it somewhere, not with Hope Summers, then they'll be able to keep going just that one more day. And when you know that there's that person there, no matter what, that can really make the difference between life and death. And I'm not saying that to be dramatic.
Yeah, all excellent points. One thing that we didn't really talk about too much is not just Billy's actual family, his, relatively new husband, but his sort of found family, his chosen family, which, you got the Young Avengers, and the whole idea of superhero teams, I think, are really very enticing specifically to like queer kids. We have to sometimes reconstruct our families. We have found families. Our friends become the people that support us, especially if we have bad experiences coming out with families. I'm a very lucky individual that I'm still very close to my family after coming out. It took a little while, but I'm still very close to them. But like having people who have these sort of shared experiences is such a wonderful stand-in for what a lot of folks in the LGBTQ plus community have to go through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, that support system is such a big part of helping him get through everything and knowing that he can go out and he can search for Wanda. And it's even a big part of the Children's Crusade is that he's like, no, this is, like me and Tommy, like this is our thing. And Teddy's like, you are not going off all by yourself. Like I'm coming with you because I love you. Although he gets frustrated. And I don't know how many different ways he said, my idiot boyfriend. And then similarly, the Young Avengers were also, our idiot friend is going off to take on Dr. Doom by his lonesome, but we're going to be there to back him up. And we don't care that the Avengers told us not to go and we're going to risk a diplomatic incident and everything. Like we're going to support Billy and Tommy because this is what they need. So I thought that was, again, just very refreshing to read. And I think so many of us can think back to the friendships and stuff that we had in our teens. And it's a combination of like that feeling you're invincible. And also just, I don't want to necessarily say mob mentality, but just that idea that like one person gets this idea in their head and all of a sudden the whole group is like, yeah, sure. Yeah, fuck it. Let's go do that. Like, it's very much that teenage mentality, and it harkens back to those of us that, are older, but we think back to when we were teens and feeling like you're invincible and hoping that you have that person that will be there for you, even if you do some really dumb shit. And in my case, I've got somebody who's been with me for 25 years, and as I'm still continuing to do some really dumb shit.
Hey, I don't know what you're talking about.
No idea. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to plug our sponsors, and when we get back, we'll get into treatment. Stay tuned. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your individual needs and match you with a licensed professional therapist. You can begin communicating within 48 hours.
It isn't a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. BetterHelp has a network of over 15,000 counselors with a broad range of expertise. You can log in and message your counselor anytime and get timely and thoughtful responses. You can also schedule regular video or phone sessions. No waiting room required.
BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if you feel you don't have a good connection. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial help is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit betterhelp.com/capes. That's better HELP. And join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional.
Special offer for Capes on the Couch fans. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/capes.
Have you ever been reading through a stack of comics and thought, maybe I should see what this Arkham Asylum game is all about? Or been playing Marvel vs. Capcom and felt like you were at a real disadvantage since you didn't know who half the characters were? Well, Play Comics is the show for you. I'm Chris, and each episode we take a look at video games based on comic properties and how well they stick to that source material. So whether you know the comics and want to know how all these games work, or you know the games and want to find out where all this craziness came from, go check out Play Comics at playcomics.com or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Hi, this is Al Ewing, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So in-universe treatment for Billy, Wiccan. Go ahead, Doc. What have you got on mind? Because this is a situation we've encountered with a couple of folks Billy, for all of the stresses that he deals with, is fairly well adjusted, I think, written as a character, not like a Marty Stew fashion, but just fairly well adjusted with everything that he's dealing with. So I'd be very curious to see where you can offer some insight to help improve him or make him more efficient or things of that nature.
I've gone off the deep end. So given his lineage and given what we've hinted at in terms of just how powerful he may be, unfortunately, this may have consequences well beyond what's intentioned with what I'm about to say. I would find a way to get Billy to say no more magic.
Wow.
Think about it. That is tied to so many things. It's tied to, as we already said, to family circumstances. It's tied to what we consider to be part of his value, both within his team as well as to society at large. I think it's an opportunity to explore what he's like without that one part. That doesn't mean that he has to be without it forever. I'm just saying it's something different. Because sometimes we get so caught up in what's going on with everybody else around us. And he definitely can be in that circumstance given with his current relationship and with, being on a super team. This really throws a wrench into things. And if it's a way that it could be done for him without impacting everybody else, because I am not a group therapist. I am not trying to do that for every single being. I don't need all of them banging down my door about how I just ruined their lives. I just want it for him. And see where we go from there, at least for sessions, not necessarily all the time.
Interesting. So kind of give him the option to turn it on and turn it off like a switch.
Yeah, at least, just to get a difference of experience, basically.
All right. That's fair. So moving to out of universe then. So what we would be discussing then is a queer teen who has some uncertainty about their parentage, has the good solid support system, but still has a couple of questions that maybe haven't necessarily been answered or haven't been answered to their liking or to their satisfaction, I would say. What are some things that you might suggest for them?
Well, first, I have to make sure I know exactly what their situation is and where they're coming from with this, because I've actually been in circumstances where the patient isn't seeking treatment for themselves. It's been foisted upon them. And from that circumstance, if that's the case, then I have to even establish, is treatment in that way appropriate? This is something that's a little heady, and I apologize right now, but it's the truth. So there have been times where parents have asked, almost like as an aside, because let me make it clear, there is no guidebook, and I apologize for all psychiatry that at any point this was a consideration with regards to LGBTQ plus when it came to how do you quote unquote fix a person. And that's horrifying to me. I'm sorry. I'm not going to delve too much further into that. But the point is, I just want to know what the person wants to deal with. Like, what is it that they actually consider to be a problem and address that? And also, I want to make sure it's a proper fit. And by that, I mean, is this a situation where if there is any one level that's not matching what the person's expectations are, then it's not my job to apologize for who I am either. In other words, I've had a situation where someone pointed out that I am a cis hetero male and there's no way that I could understand what they've been going through. Okay, fair enough. I'm not trying to apologize for who I am. I want to make sure that you have a therapist that you're going to be able to connect with. And so my main goal is making sure they get that therapist, not to be defensive, not to be insulted, anything of the sort. So that's one part of it. The other part, of course, is when it comes to, if we're talking about teenagers, adolescents, things like that, okay, I just need them to talk to me. That's probably the biggest thing, because there are so many times where I've had patients just say like, it's okay. And that's it. They won't talk. So I know I've mentioned this in other podcast episodes, but basically I want to see if I can get the hook. I'm sorry. I know it's more like when it comes to entertainment, but the point is I want to find a common bond. Sometimes that's not even related to what their major concern is. I don't care if it's music. I don't care if it's comics. I don't care if it's video games, whatever. I got to find something that connects with a person at that age or that stage of life, I should say, because it can be, it can be just about any age, but just find something that's considered not necessarily a barrier, but at least a bridge point. Because without that, then it's two people talking past each other, and the therapist is just trying to endure it so that they hope they don't make a mistake. And the patient is just looking at it as something like, I hope I don't say something wrong, so that they dive into something I don't want to talk about.
Perfectly stated. I do think, and we've spoken on the show previously about the importance of the connection between the therapist and the patient. Khelan, I guess, as you know, obviously you're not a therapist, but what are some suggestions or helpful things that you might say to someone who is struggling as an LGBTQ, say again, a teenager, looking for some resources, some things that can help them address some concerns that they might have with, again, as Doc said, not trying to cure the gay away, so to speak.
Well, hopefully that no reputable therapist does that. And I know the American Psychiatric Association has denounced reparative therapy quite a long time ago, even though it still happens around the country and around the world. There's some great resources out there. And I was, did some volunteer work with the Trevor Project, which is there for, suicide prevention and just generally helping people cope, specifically if they live in areas where they can't go talk to somebody, they don't have anybody else to talk to. And it's super tough. I consider myself very lucky, even though I came out quite a while ago, in college. The people I came out to, my friends, my family, even though there were some uncomfortable moments, it was still everything came from love and nothing came from we reject you. You're not part of our, either biological or found family anymore. So I'm very, very lucky in that. But I know not everybody has that. And this is why I think representation matters so much. And it's something I take super seriously with pop culture, with movies, TV shows, comics. Obviously, we've been talking about Wiccan for the last hour or so. And being able to see yourself, even if it's a magic user, who is the son of one of the most powerful mutants/magicians in the world, the grandson of one of the most powerful mutants in the world. Once Marvel fixes that retcon, I fully acknowledge that. All that stuff, it's just, if you can't see yourself in the things that you consume, then you think that you're abnormal, and that makes it super tough. And things have gotten better. Doc, to your point, comics, there's the flexibility because it's lower stakes. It takes less money to produce them. And so comic companies, even mainstream ones like Marvel and DC, can be more experimental, whereas movies require so much capital, and to be profitable, they've got to make box office receipts outside of the United States. They've got to go to places like China, and China, the government there is incredibly homophobic. It's incredibly queerphobic. And it makes it really tough for real representation to happen there. And when you don't see yourself, it just makes it really tough. You have serious dissonance. You have identity issues, and hell, even in comics, they've done better on a lot of queer content and queer representation. But I'm still waiting for the day that there's a major trans character in the X books or even in Marvel books. We're starting to see more and more. There's a character in Immortal Hulk. I don't know if you'll have read that, which is good. DC is certainly getting more and more representation in that regard, but it could be better. I'll just say that it's improving, but it could be better.
That's fair. And, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I welcome this stuff because I acknowledge that pop culture and, fiction in general has been written for and by folks that look like me for millennia, for pretty much all of recorded civilization. And there's some great stories there. There's some fantastic stories about straight white guys, but they're not the only stories that need to be told. So I am okay, let's see something else. Let's see some diversity. So I welcome the diverse comics. I welcome diverse movies and TV shows. It's okay, if there's a good story and I can find something that, the characters to hook me in, I'm all for it. So with all of that being said, we're again so grateful to have Khelan help us out and see what happens when we get Wiccan on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Billy. I'm Dr. Issues.
Hey, Doc.
How are you?
I mean, things have been worse.
That's not exactly a rousing endorsement.
Sorry, I just mean there were a lot of questions that were driving me crazy, and I don't have nearly as many as I did before. That's a good thing.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So what lingers?
Still a ton of stuff. This is a bit hard, I mean, I get it's your job, but sometimes I think even professionals will misinterpret what I'm saying. So I'm careful with what I let out.
Totally understandable. Just remember that this is confidential. So even if things don't go as expected, they stay between us as long as no one's put in danger.
Good to know.
So name something you want to discuss.
I want to be calm. I want to be calm. I want to be calm. I want to be calm.
Excuse me?
Sorry, just wanted to be sure I was in the right headspace before I started. Is it wrong to want your husband to be around more?
That sounds like a loaded question. I take it you mean like more than he is now, and that there's some sort of barrier to that?
Exactly.
Does he disagree with you?
Not exactly. It has more to do with outside activities.
Are they activities that you approve of?
I don't have a choice.
Well, there's always a choice. I mean, it's just a matter of consequences.
Well, the consequences here involve the well-being of a whole empire. So do with that what you will.
That's heavy stuff.
Listen, I'm so proud of him for taking on his responsibility, and he does it so well and capably. And it doesn't hurt that he looks amazing with a crown on his head. I want some more us time,
For once, when talking to a superhero, I do know. And quite well. So, how far would you say that the scale has shifted?
Oh, he hasn't packed on weight or anything. He still looks great. He can still bench press.
I'm glad that you're clearly still into him physically. What I meant was on the work-life balance spectrum and his time with the crown versus his time with you. Where is he on that scale?
Maybe 75, 25. No, that's too harsh. How about 60, 40?
Okay, your first answer was your gut. And that's okay. Intuition that's unrecognized can lead to dangerous emotional impulse. Your second answer sounds like what you would settle for. So, but tell me, really, like, where do you want it to be?
Well, the selfish side of me would say 595, and that's being generous. We're newly married. Our honeymoon was interrupted by symbiote dragons attacking the resort. And it seems like he can't make a decision without having to worry about some intergalactic treaty or alliance hanging on his every move. I love him, and I'll be his ride or die until neither of us draw breath. But I confess, I did not see this as part of the whole till death do us part thing when I fell in love with him. So the simple answer is, I don't honestly know what a good balance would be, but I know this ain't it.
That may be one of the most mature answers I've heard in a long time. I'm not going to promise that those outside factors are going to change, but I can vow that it's my ethical duty to help your attempts at discovering a better balance each time we discuss it in each session. My only caution to you is not to expect things to just magically change.
Except you realize you know who you're talking to, right?
Yes, but even still.
I want better balance, I want better balance, I want better balance, I want better balance, I want better balance.
Well, as I was saying, I know you want things to be towards total devotion, but the increase in civil unrest may be taking an emotional toll on your partner. Have you talked about that with him?
Pardon me, but I don't think it's that bad.
Well, 2575 isn't your perfect goal, and yet the attempts on the lives of your fellow heroes must have led to so much anxiety.
No, that's not...
But you did say he was willing to surrender if it came time to save you. I mean, I'm glad that he's made it known how much he loves you.
I want a better kingdom, I want a better kingdom, I want a better kingdom, I want a better kingdom.
You're clearly using your abilities to influence what you can, but I've been talking a lot here. Rather than, creating more stress for yourself, let me know, what's your take on your husband's pushback?
I want the kingdom to be better. I thought I made that clear with the spells and the talking, and I really thought you would have picked up on this by now. Oh my gosh, have I completely made things worse? Oh, no, not again.
Well, I usually don't jump to this in a session, but Your anxiety appears to be through the roof. Have you considered other forms of relaxation or a discussion on possible medication management?
Sorry. I just had a bit of a freak out there. We were talking about acceptable balance. I'm willing to work at the slow, the non-magic way.
No problem. 76-24 is not the worst I've ever heard in terms of ratio.
What?
Just a bit of humor on my end. Usually the reality is somewhere between your gut and your partner's thoughts. I'm in no position right now to tell you what the number is. Only you can know that.
Oh, so the things you said before with what I cast and the responses after that wasn't so bad. I didn't screw everything up. There's still a chance. Oh my God, this is amazing.
You're welcome. I must say, for someone who knows a lot about things that I couldn't begin to understand, you sell yourself short with how much you have in your control.
Maybe not as much as you think, Doctor.
Okay, then. Perhaps we'll discuss how much control you have over the situation in our next session. In the meantime, enjoy that makeup honeymoon that your constituents planned for you out of respect for your personal life.
Whoa. Then it really made a difference? I did better? Never mind. You're right. Let's leave it at that. I want to go to Teddy. I want to go to Teddy. I want to go to Teddy. I want to go to Teddy.
So thank you so much, Khelan, for taking the time and playing Billy and talking with us today. This was absolutely fantastic. Why don't you just recap again about the Homo Superior podcast and where folks can find it and you on social media and things of that nature.
Well, thanks again so much for having me. This is a lot of fun, and I love delving into like the psyche of various superheroes. I think y'all have an amazing podcast. But for Homo Superior, we've been around for almost 5 years. It's 5 gay men based in Washington, D.C., talking about X-Men, the MCU, Marvel Comics, DC Comics, a lot of nerdy shit. We have a good time. We're dumb as hell, but we'll make you laugh, I promise. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud. Please interact with us on Twitter at Homo Superior X and on Instagram at Homo Superior Podcast.
Well, thank you again. And we'll have notes. We'll have links to all that stuff in the show notes. So as Chris from Play Comics says, it's a lot easier to click than to type that stuff out. So we'll have the links to everything there. Recommended reading for this week is The Young Avengers, I would say specifically Volume 1, and then also the Avengers, The Children's Crusade. Those are the two very big Wiccan heavy stories. So go check that out, especially if you can go to your local comic shop and pick up the trades. Otherwise, recommend going to Marvel Unlimited and reading them there. We got a review read, so we'll bang through this real quick. Over on Podchaser, Tamir left us this. Mad at myself for sleeping on such a unique and engaging podcast, but after binging and catching up in just under 3 months, I have 2 things to say. Number 1, this podcast is amazing. Just because the characters are fictional doesn't mean the issues they have are, and that always surprises me when I get emotionally invested in an episode and have to remind myself that I'm in public. And number 2, I'm now sad that I have to wait weekly for new episodes when I was knocking out a couple a day while working. Listener for life. Thank you, Tamir. Thank you. Those are very, very kind words. And you email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com. Reach out to us with your address. We'll send you a sticker as a way to say thank you. And that goes for anybody else if you leave us a review on Podchaser or Apple Podcasts. And you then send us an email with your address and a screen cap of your review. We will send you a sticker as a way to say thank you, because reviews and ratings is how we get in front of more ears. So coming up, we've got episodes on Donna Troy, Homelander, and Polaris. So we're kind of going all over the board here on the episodes and the character types. Homelander in particular, I would say, Doc, you better start reinforcing your office now, because I have a feeling you're not going to come out of that one unscathed. Just saying.
Yeah.
And as always, you can find all of our episodes on our website, capesonthecouch.com. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. We thanked again all of our patrons at the top of the show, patreon.com/Capes on the Couch. And or you can email us, capesonthecouch@gmail.com, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or otherwise. And so when you're done with this, go check out the Homo Superior podcast. Khelan, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and looking forward to hopefully doing this again.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Wait, hold on. Don't cut me out of this.
You're right. I'm sorry. I forgot. You got to get your line in before we head out. Doc, is there anything you want to add?
So, I have to admit, Billy is great with magic. He's great with romance, but he still is a son of a witch.
And there you have it. For Khelan from Homo Superior and Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.